Yes, as we have earlier said in our previous videos concerning the death ceremony, we told you that we shall explain how the earlier apostles buried their dead. They have procedure on how they buried their dead, different from that of the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, they do embalmment, they do mourning ceremony before they carry out the burial, and the person is lowered in the gallows. Then, in the New Testament dispensation, we have just explained that their own burial, where Christ said, "He that putteth his hand on the plow and looketh back is not fit for the kingdom." Having done that, having seen that, we want to give you examples of how Christians ought to bury their corpse. Let's see the book of Matthew, chapter 14, verse 10. Matthew chapter 14. We read from verse 10. Look at what the Bible said here. "And he sent and beheaded John in the prison." Verse 11. "And his head was brought in a charger and given to the damsel, and she brought it to her mother. Verse 12. "And the disciples came, and his disciples came and took up the body and buried it, and went and told Jesus. And Jesus heard of it. He departed thence by ship into the desert place apart, and went. And when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on foot out of the city." This is one of the examples of the disciples of Christ that died. Look at what happened. This is a typical and a perfect example of how believers ought to organize burial, ought to bury their member as Christians. A very perfect example as New Testament believers, as Christ-like believers, not as Mosaic believers, not as Old Testament believers. Look at what happened here. Immediately the corpse of John the Baptist was pronounced dead, and they noticed it. Immediately they were told. The Bible said the disciples came. The other fellow disciples of Christ came, and they took him to the gallows. Immediately they buried him. Not only that, immediately after they buried him, they went and told Jesus. Jesus felt remorse. But not only that, he departed to the desert apart, and he started preaching the gospel. And not only that, immediately the disciples followed him immediately. They continue their preaching business, their business of propagating the gospel. They continued immediately. Now, that ceremony that causes Christ to feel remorse, being the birthday of the king, is what apostles of today, who call themselves men of God, are still celebrating. Now look at the burial. The burial they are celebrating following the Old Testament. Look at the example of a disciple of Christ that just died. Immediately he was buried, and they continued the gospel. They did not say, "Okay, let me go and wait for let me go and tell my mother farewell. Take to the mortuary, take to the house in bar. After that, we mourn. After that, all these service of song and whatever, before burial, begin to captivate people, organize food, organize coffee, organize plenty arrangements, causing people, a widow, let's assume a man that lost the wife, causing the widower to have hypertension, putting the man in debt. If it is a man, putting the woman in debt. You want to organize burial. All these things we need to think over it. Believers, New Testament believers, I am asking you, where did you get the idea of burial ceremony? Tell us. Look at the perfect example of how a Christian need to be buried. Based on this injunction, we are also coming to give you another example. Thank you for now.